All right, guys, in part 2, which is today's video, we're going to go ahead and finish the internal disassembly of this 4L80E. We're going to continue using the unit repair manual, but I'm also going to be referencing these parts explosions. All right, so these are out of the GM parts system online, and they give us a lot more detail than the unit repair manual will. And what I've done on here to help us when we get to the rebuild stage is I've indexed all of these numbers to the part numbers that are applicable when we get to the point of actually rebuilding it, which will be in the video after this. So we're going to go through here in this video, and we're mostly going to be concerned with getting everything broken down internally, just like you see here, all through all of the clutch assemblies, all of that, all of this, and finally all of this with the pump. That's what we're going to do in today's video. And another reason why I like these parts explosions is you can see some parts that are shown in the pictures but aren't serviced by GM. Like, for example, we see part 202 here and part 233 here and 234 here. These are all bushings. Now, GM didn't service any of the bushings on these 4L80Es. You know, for example, if you needed this bushing 202 here, or you needed 233, you would be expected to replace this whole piece, this whole 203 piece, or in the case of this one, this whole 206 piece of the pump. They didn't sell you these individual bushings. That's because when they made these items, these bushings were line bored during the manufacturing process for the tolerances that were involved, and the dealerships were just not equipped to get what GM engineers wanted there, so they did not offer those as separate bushings that you could replace. There's one bushing on this whole assembly that is offered, and I might even have mistakenly referenced it here. I'm going to take a quick look to make sure I did not. No, none of these are the ones that is. There's one bushing, and we'll talk about that during reassembly, that GM sells. But the rest, you have to replace the whole part out. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start from the tail forward. Right, so we're going to end up starting right from this area here. We're going to work our way in from the tail all the way through these different clutch assemblies. Right, and then we'll work into the other page you just saw, and we'll end with the pump. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, guys, we're going to start now with the center support and gear unit assembly disassemble. Right, so they're going to show several steps. We've got the center support and thrust washer being separated from the main gear unit assembly. Then the sun gear shaft. And as we go, they're going to talk about things that you need to check for damage, right? So on the sun gear shaft, we're going to be looking for any physical damage and overwearness to the bushings. And we're going to be especially looking at the splines and teeth and cracks in the metal. After that, we're going to remove the reaction drum and carrier assembly from this unit here. We're going to take the roller clutch, which you'll see very shortly, from on top of this. And again, they're going to pause and have you stop and look for damage, checking pinions, pinion gears, pocket thrust surfaces for any physical damage. They're looking for cracks on the outer surface of the drum where the band applies. We're looking for damage there, physical damage there. Pinion gears like chipped teeth or excessive wear on the teeth. And then making sure that the planet pinion pin hasn't walked and it's in the correct position. And again, checking bushings for damage. Roller clutch, which is this guy here, we're going to check for damage to the roller springs and cage surfaces. Sometimes this assembly can develop damage where the rollers break out of it. Again, this is all physical damage inspections so that we can reuse most of this equipment. And then finally, we're going to remove the center support to reaction carrier thrust bearing. 647, 640 up, that's a typo. That should be 48, right? So the races are 46 and 48 with the bearing 47, so that's just a typo. Remove the sun gear, remove the reaction carrier washer, and inspect those thrust washers and bearings and inspect the sun gear teeth for damage. So we're going to go do all that. So we've got our unit here. We've wrapped up since the previous video where we first took it out. Trying to get some of this stuff out of the way. All right, so they're going to want us, again, like they showed, they want us to remove this center support piece. So we're going to slide this guy down like that so we can work on him a little easier. Now this guy here, this is the spring of the piston for the center support, and there's a retaining ring there, so we don't want to touch that yet. We want to get this guy separated from this other unit intact first. Just push him out like that. And then there's our, we didn't want to take him out yet. We're following the manual, don't want to confuse you. So there's this piece here that we've got there. And then number 642 is this little bronze guy sitting right there. All right, now we can take this guy out. The bushings they're referring to are these fluted ones that are inside here on this end and this end. And so you can feel that the wear is such that you can't even feel the flutes anymore. So that's the kind of thing they're talking about. Now, like I said in the opening of this video, GM is not going to service these bushings. What GM wanted you to do is to replace this whole thing, because when this piece is manufactured, these bushings are put in at manufacturing time, and then they're in-line bored to the appropriate alignment. And that's why they don't want the technicians at the dealership trying to replace these. So, you know, depends on the situation whether we would buy this whole piece or try to do an aftermarket like I mentioned at the beginning of the video. For right now, we're just getting through this disassembly. We'll inspect this a little bit more later. In fact, I need to go grab something. Let me pause for a moment. All right, so all I was going to do here, guys, I like to mark the ends on parts like this to keep track of how they came out of the unit. And what we'll do is we'll use blue if it faces towards the torque converter, and we'll use yellow if it faces towards the transfer case. And that'll just help us keep track of how things, you know, some things are obvious how they go, some things are not as obvious how they go. And then similarly for something like this thrust bearing here, we just might want to later on look at this in terms of seeing if there's some kind of wear situation. And so I like to even mark things like this with the direction we found it. All right, let's keep going. So we've pulled out the sun gear shaft. The next thing they want us to do was to remove this piece here, which is the reaction drum. And they wanted us to take this roller clutch assembly out. The first thing that catches my eye is there's like some heat damage here. And I don't know if that's from the manufacturing process. Maybe, because I only see it in this one spot. You can just see where the steel's blued. If we zoom in there, there's some bluing on the steel. But I think that's probably from the manufacturing process where these two pieces were welded together. Because I see there's a spot weld there. So probably nothing to worry about on that. We've got those two separated. And then the next thing they told us they want us to do was to grab this bushing and races. There should be another one of these. So there's our needle bearing, and there's the bottom race. And what I'm fishing around here for is where's the other one. Would have expected there to be another race sitting here somewhere. Let's go ahead and remove this guy, which is the sun gear. And by the way, you know, if you ever wonder why these things are called what they're called, this is called a sun gear because these are called planetary gears. And planets orbit the sun. That's where that naming comes from. Okay, this guy here is just a plastic washer. There's some indents that tell you what direction it goes. It fits into those depressions there. So the only thing of curiosity is where that other race went. I'm wondering if that's him stuck here. I think that's him stuck there. Yep, there he is. So there's the other piece to this that we were looking for. All right, at this point we've gone through and landed where we did on this page, right? That's that plastic washer. There's our sun gear, and we just found part 646, which was the other piece of the race that goes on here. Continuing on. So at this point, they're going to want us to take 672 off, which is the shaft, output shaft retainer ring. There's going to be another thrust washer there, and then we'll have the output shaft itself. So we're going to end up flipping this guy around in order to do that. And actually, these pieces that normally sit on the back here, not sure why the service manual didn't mention removing them earlier, right? But you've got a selective washer here, spacer. Yeah, they're stuck together, right? And then you've got this guy that fits in here, which is just a thrust washer. So we're just going to go ahead and get these two out so that they're out of our way. All right, so there's the ring they want us to take off. All right, now let's try to get this guy. Get him started. Once we get him started, then we can get him the rest of the way by hand. All right, there's that. And with that out of the way, that comes off. There's another bearing in here. And a race that sits down like that. There's another bushing in here. You can see the bronze in there that's pushed in. Okay, so actually we should have just took this whole kit and caboodle out here. Needle bearing, and there's another race right there. See if we can get it for this guy. Otherwise, I might have to go grab my magnet. Sometimes pieces like this, it's easier to use a magnet to grab them and fish them out that way. Right, just like that. Okay. Now, where are we? So we just finished this step here. Bing, boom, bang. We just took that collection out from 669, 47, and 48. And now what we've got is the other side of this piece. So we've got a retaining ring on top that's holding this piece together. So you got this 670 ring on top of this. Ooh, that's a bad number. The 666, the devil part, will then separate the shaft from these two pieces. And then we just remove that other piece there. All right. So there is that ring right there. Need some snap ring pliers. And we'll fish that guy out. Got two different sizes. Let's try this size first. First get this guy off. Got another bearing in here, just like it showed in the picture. See if we can get this little retaining clip off. All right, there's that. And there's that. All right, at this point, we've done this, and now we're over to this assembly here. And all they're telling you here, again, are different things to check. Checking teeth, checking for physical damage, but we're also going to do some end plate checks with a feeler gauge on this component. So let me get some of these parts that we have on the table here bagged up, and then we'll start this next section. All right, guys, I'm going to show you an example where even with using the unit repair manual, there's some generic aspects to this. So right on here, on this step here, we pulled out a 663 and a 665 race and a 664 bearing, and that should have been it attached to the rear internal gear, right? But when we took the rear internal gear off, we found another piece stuck on the inside that turns out to be part 691. It's a little spacer. That doesn't show up in our unit repair manual. So that's why it's a good idea, like I showed at the beginning, to have our parts explosion with all of our part numbers, and we can do a quick reference here. We can see, well, there's 666 and there's 691. So our 99 has this extra piece that the unit repair manual doesn't mention. So that's the way we can always make sure that we have everything accounted for. All right, let's keep going. So we've got this guy. You can see in here I've got everything numbered. Everything's got yellow or blue depending on whether it faced torque converter or transfer case, so we don't misplace anything. We go put it back, and we can always reference our own video, of course, too. And that left us on the end play. All right, so we've got the reaction drum and carrier pinion, and we've got the output carrier pinion. And if we zoom in here, what they're talking about in that section, get an initial one to start with. So here's our pinion gear, and there's a washer right on top of that. And what they want you to do is they want you to see what the play is here. So I'm doing an 18 thousandths, and I can get an 18 thousandths in there. If I go up to a 19, I cannot, well, almost, kind of real tight fit, right? I kind of wiggle it in, I got 19. So let's call it 18 to 19, and this guy here on the reaction drum, and anything between 9 thousandths and 24 thousandths would have been okay, right? So we had between 18 and 19 thousandths, we're in spec here. So why do we do all that? Well, if we had a problem here, then this unit would need to have those washers replaced or the whole unit replaced, right, depending on the way you went, right? This is not something that you can disassemble very easily yourself. It's all riveted together, so it's something that maybe a transmission shop could rebuild, but if I had that problem, what I would elect to do is just replace the whole unit with a new GM piece. However, we don't have to do that. This guy's okay. So we've already tagged him, now we can bag him. And this is a piece that we'll be able to go ahead and clean up. We'll check the band surface. Just taking a quick run right there, right? Give it the fingernail test. We're going to go over the whole thing, decide if we're going to keep it or not. For now, we can get it out of the way. Same deal on the output carrier. So again, I'll start with around 18. That's kind of like the midway. See if we can get that in there. Again, zoom in. You can see there's our pinion gear, and there's that little washer right on top of it. Right, so we can get the 18 in there. And you just keep walking up until you can't get anything any bigger. Right? Get 19 in there. And it turns out I already did all this checking off camera, and I was able to walk all the way up to 21. And so if we take a look here, the range is the same, between 9 thousandths and 24 thousandths, and we get up to 21 thousandths. So again, the end play on these pinion washers is okay. And so this piece as well, we can keep, tag and bag, and send it off to the parts washer. All right, so the next thing that the manual want us to do, they're going to get into assembly, of course, so we're not going to do that yet. We're going to skip over that. They want us to disassemble the center support, which is what we got left right here. So there's some plastic kind of sealing rings here, right? And they come out just like you see here if you zoom in super close. You see these kind of guys just kind of fit together. You kind of give them a squeeze from the side, and you can usually get them out with your finger if they've been here a long time. If not, small pry bar, you can get in here and get these off. Now, for whatever reason, they're not having us do that step yet. They first want us to get a spring compressor on here, press this down, and remove this ring. So let's do that. All right, so they're talking about you needing some special tools from Kent Moore, a J23 327 or a J38 734. And if you have those tools, that's fantastic. It's very easy to do what we're going to do here if you have those tools. If you don't have those tools, and those tools are like this, right? It's kind of like a little mousetrap thing with a wing nut, and it compresses the spring. It compresses a spring so you can remove the retaining ring with some snap ring pliers. But you can also use a generic tool like this, right? This is just something I'll put links in the description for. It's meant to be used in a vise, meaning put a couple of pieces of wood on it like I've done. You can use it on the bench. Just easier to film like that. And this is just a generic. It's not for any specific transmission. And all it does is let you compress the spring. That's all you need. You don't need, necessarily any fancy dealer tools to do this step. So we just get this guy compressed down enough so that we can remove that ring. A little bit of bigger one. This guy. Almost had him. There we go. And then we can release the tension. And the job is done. Now this spring piece will come out. I just want to take note that these springs are okay, not busted off. They fit down into these little recesses on top of this piston. And just like that, when we get ready to put it back together again, they look fine. All right, next up, they tell you you can use some air, probably around 40 psi, to separate these two. And then we'll remove the seals. And then we'll remove those 4 oil rings that I showed you at the beginning. So let's do that. Let me get some air over here. All right, we got some air. First, I'm going to take this seal out on the side. Seal number 640. And yeah, we're going to replace that, but just keep the old one so we can size it up and make sure the replacement is the same size. All right, now come over to the center support bolt hole. We'll try to ease this off. All right. There's that. All right, so one thing I want to show you on here, the way these seals go. I'm going to get over the white. We're going to super zoom in here. So it's very important you see how the lip on the original seal is facing like this, in this direction. And then when we look at the inside one, right, it's like in the same orientation but opposite. So the inner one, it faces in like that to create a sealing surface, but it still has got a U shape up. And then the outer one has got this kind of U shape, but it's facing on the outside sealing surface. Right? So when you get to put these back in, just make sure you take note of that. All right, so we're definitely going to be replacing these guys. So there's that one. This big guy would be 638. And this little guy will be 637. And again, we just keep them like this and numbered so that we can match them up by size. And our parts reference will cover us for getting it lined back up to the correct GM part number. All right, we'll save this piston guy in here. Get them all cleaned up in the parts washer. And now we got these rings. right, so like I was showing you before, this particular kind is not a solid Teflon type ring. These have a little piece that separates off, so we can get them off like that. Sometimes a pick can be a better tool for this. 1, 2, 3. This guy right here. Come on. Trying to get him off and also trying not to block your view. The other thing we're going to do here is we're just trying to take a look and see, if we have any excess wear. All right, we got one more down here to get out. Same deal. Of course, we got to drag him across all the other ones. I guess in hindsight, I probably should have took him off first. All right, and we're done. We have now completed the center support and rear gear assembly, disassembly section. Let me get cleaned up here and we'll start the next one. All right, guys, let's move on with the direct clutch assembly disassembling. So they're going to want us to remove part 627, which is the intermediate roller clutch retaining ring. It's like a spiral type ring. And then they're going to want us to remove the intermediate roller clutch retainer, 626. The roller clutch outer race, 625, the intermediate clutch sprag assembly, which consists of these three parts here that comprise 624. They want you to inspect that sprag for any damaged sprags or a damaged cage or distorted spring. So let's go ahead and get going with that. Got this guy in from when we originally disassembled him. You guys might remember on the disassembly video, we did pop this ring out. And we took off this retainer just so to make it easier to get everything apart on this side. We put that back for this view here just so you don't get confused seeing this all get separated out. Whoopsie doozy there. A little bit slippery. All right, so they're talking about on this side. If we get down here, this ring here. All right, so you can see there's a little notch on it. You zoom in, and so we can get our tool into the little notch and work it off. Right. This one's not like a normal ring. It's kind of like a slinky. Sometimes it helps to have a pick handy too, just to continue to get it out of the grooves. You don't have to be too gentle with it because these cannot be reused. All right, so that guy's out. Use the magnet end of our tool to now take off the retainer, just like was explained. All right, so he just fits in here with these two nubs. And get this piece out. Just, we're just repeating what we saw in the manual earlier. He's a little bit stuck on us. There he goes. All right, there's our sprag. It's not going to come out that easy. There he goes. And then we can push him out from this side. It's just a really tight fit. Okay. Okay. So we got that guy, and we got that guy. And then we got one more piece here. Just going to try to spin it off here. It's just, again, one of these things that's got a real tight fitment. You want to be super gentle with these kind of parts, right? You don't want to get anything bent or damaged. There he goes. He just got himself cocked in there for some reason. Okay. That's it on this side. Now we're going to flip it over. We're going to continue with the manual. All right, so we got all these pieces out here. We took off the 627 ring. We took off 626. I showed you the two nubs on either end. We took off the sprag assembly, and then we took off 624, all three pieces of that. Now we flipped it over. We're going to remove 616, which is the retaining ring. We're going to take out the direct clutch backing plate. We're going to take out the set of frictions and steels that comprise the clutch, and then at the bottom 609 should be a wave plate. So let's do that now. Find a place where we can wedge in here and get this ring re-separated. Somewhere, there you go. All right. Once you get him started, and he's not too bad to finish. So that guy's out. Here's our backing plate. A magnet can be very handy, moving these kind of parts out. And then here's our set of frictions and steels. Easiest thing I do on here is just let gravity help. Okay. So there's friction, steel, friction, steel, friction, steel, friction, steel, friction, steel, and then wave plate. All right, next step. They want you to do a J23 327 and a 25018A in order to compress the spring so that you can then remove the retaining ring 608. We're going to use a surrogate tool for that. Once we compress that, remove the ring, we'll be able to separate the spring and retainer assembly along with the direct clutch piston. So we just want to kind of familiarize ourselves with where the opening of the ring is, which is right there. Bring our spring compressor tool over here. That we used earlier. Get it into a good spot. You just, when you're using a tool that's not the OEM tool, right, you can save a lot of money, but you often have to be more attentive to little idiosyncrasies about the tool. You just want to make sure we get this thing nice and even. And we don't have to crank it down too far. We don't want to damage anything. Just enough to get that ring out. We're going to use a pair of snap ring pliers for that I unfortunately did not put on the bench here. All right, guys, with our particular tool setup, What's going to work best is to turn this guy around so that the gap is facing the rear. Because now we can get our tool in a lot easier without having to, fight with the position. We can get our finger in here to keep it from popping out. And now, with the ability to get a pry bar, little mini pry bar in here, we can get this guy off. Yeah. Almost had him. There we go. It's just a real awkward spot. All right, there he goes. We just had to take a little bit more tension off of him. And now with that ring out, slowly release the tension on our springs. Got to get this guy out of here. Alright, so there's our spring assembly, just like the manual was showing. And now we've got our piston rather. And this is a later model design, so it's a bonded piston, where the seal and the piston are kind of like one unit. We still got some fluid that's kind of accumulated down here we can clean out. And we can take a look and see if we see any debris, but we don't. Okay. So we completed this step here, so we pulled the piston out. We just checked it right now. We don't see any damage on the seal. Remove the direct clutch piston intermediate seal, which is this lip right here. And then we'll just check the whole housing for cracks and we're done. So if we zoom in on this seal, what you want to notice is, again, when you're looking at these seals, their orientation, right? So we can see that the lip is right here, facing up. All right, so we'll go ahead and prise this guy out. Right, and now we've got that. So this is all done. So that's it for disassembling the direct clutch assembly. We'll go ahead and bag and number our parts and move on to the next. All right, now we're going to move on to disassembling of the forward clutch. And so in this subassembly, what we're going to be doing, and again, they're going to reference the need of the J23-327 and the J25-018A, and we're going to continue using our aftermarket compressor when it comes to that step. They're going to want us to remove part 616, which is the direct hub retaining ring, which will then allow us to remove the direct clutch hub, which is 615, right? So they're kind of removing that over here. With that out of the way, we'll be able to remove this plastic thrust washer, 614, and then we'll be able to take the actual hub, 613, and then there's a bronze thrust washer underneath that, and that will then expose a spring assembly that's under here. So once we get that stage here in 602, then we're going to move down to this picture here. All right, what they're showing you here is you have a clutch stack and a wave plate. We'll take all that out of here, And then we're going to need to compress that spring, which is what they're showing over here, and remove the snap ring or the retaining ring that's inside. And then after we do that, we can separate out, this is a bonded forward clutch piston, 606, and then 685 would be the inner seal, right? So we'd be able to take all that apart. So pretty straightforward. So here is our forward clutch assembly. Straight from what we took out in part 1 video. It's a little bit too big for this bag. All right, and then here's the retaining bolt that we had when we did the original disassembly. So we'll keep that together and bag that, although that's a discardable bolt. We'll hold on to it. All right, so just like our manual talked about, we can see the retaining ring, part 616. See if I can get a good angle in here to grab this guy. I'm going to use 2. I'm going to use 1 to push him away and 1 to pull him up. Once we get him up over here, then we can work him out with our hand. All right, so there's 616. Now, that guy out of the way, we can remove 615. And what I'm doing right here is I'm just separating out anything that's sticking to it, right? All right. And then now here is that clutch pack. So what we can do to get this guy out is we can just let gravity help us. I think we got everything now. All right, there would be the wave plate. Separating it out from the hub. There's that plastic thrust washer we saw mentioned. See if I can get him to come off here. It's just some surface tension because we've got some ATF on here still. All right, so there's that guy. There's the bronze one that was mentioned here on the other side. All right, got the stack, and now we've got the spring assembly. So just like we've done before, we can put this in our compressor tool. This guy's kind of tall, so we're going to have to adjust him a little bit in order to get him to fit. And then we want to find where our snap ring is, right there. Let's get that guy initially positioned. Just like we've done in some of these other disassemblies, right? We have to spend a little bit more time doing setup because we're not using the genuine GM tool here, right? So this is just a universal kind of compressor for all makes and models of transmissions. And just like on the other ones, we also, you don't want to go crazy cranking it down because this is a thin kind of steel here on the top. You put it down too far, you can damage it. Actually, you know what, guys, I'm going to do here is I'm going to spin this around. You can spin the ring around too, it doesn't matter. All right, from this orientation, got a little bit easier shot to get the tip of our snap ring pliers to grab this ring. Get it opened enough. We can get a tool on one end. And then we're going to get a tool on the other end, and then we're going to be able to pop this guy out. At least that's the theory anyway. I don't know if I'm going to actually be able to do that though, because this guy is just in there so deeply. We can just walk it out from the back. There we go. Just Keep your fingers on these rings when you're getting them out like this, guys, so they don't go flying. All right, finally, got that guy loose. Now we can release the tension on the spring assembly. All right, with that out, we can take this guy out. And what you want to look for in here is that all these springs are still welded on where they're supposed to be, or rather snapped in where they're supposed to be, and that you don't have any bends in the assembly. Now what we've got is this piston in here, and we should just be able to wiggle him out. We want to see if there's any damage on the seal. If the seal doesn't look damaged, if you remember what it said in our manual over here, it pointed out these bonded pistons are reusable. So if you don't have any damage to the seal, the whole idea here is you can reuse them. And if you get them mixed up, right, this one's stamped forward, so you know this is the forward bonded clutch. All right, so he looks good. And that point, this is our last piece. This is part 685. I'm not even sure if he comes out or not. Maybe not. So if we go over here and look at our manual, it's showing 606 that we just took off. It's showing part 685, and they're showing pulling that guy out, but they're not mentioning pulling it out. They're just talking about inspecting this, checking for wear, damaged thrust faces, and free operation of the check ball. The check ball is this guy over here. We really can't check him until we get all this fluid out of here, and then we kind of give it a shake and see if we hear it. All right, guys, after doing a couple of checks here, this part that's inside here, this inner seal, 685, so even though in the blow-up it shows it separate, it's actually a pressed-on piece. And if I check the parts explosion, we can see it's also shown separately. But if we check our part number list, we find out this is not serviced separately, that you can't get 685 without buying this whole unit. So this stays in there and we don't remove it. So just like the bonded piston is reusable, this inner seal that's bonded on here is also reusable. All right, the last two things we've got on this is, on the other end of this, we've got a bearing, which is part 601. Take that guy out. And the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to make sure that check ball is okay. You just want to hear this guy kind of rattle around. I doubt it's going to come across in the video, but that's the check for this guy. All right, that's it for the forward clutch, completely disassembled. We're going to go ahead and bag and number everything and move on to the fourth clutch. All right, fourth clutch next. We're going to remove the, and again, always like you're going to see here, you're going to see a need for these various spring compressor pieces. In this case, there's a special adapter for the fourth clutch, the J38882, and then the same J23327 compressor, and then the J38731-3 base. We're not going to use any of that. We're going to continue using our generic one to get these springs out when the time comes. All right, the first thing I'm going to have you take out is the 523 retaining ring from 529, and what that's going to do is expose the ability to pull the clutch pack from this guy. So there's 524 is the backing plate that'll be on top of the stack, and then alternating 525s and 526s, frictions and steels. Then we're going to flip it over, and this is where we're going to remove this spring, this outer spring. It's held in, that particular spring is part 532, and it's held in by 533 as the ring. When we get the spring out, then we'll be able to separate these last few pieces. We're going to have a clutch piston, 528, with a seal, 527, and then 529 is the housing, and then finally we're going to have another seal, 531. This part here, 530, they're talking about is a orifice cup plug, and we're going to have to do an inspection on that, and that is going to be it. This is a pretty simple one to take apart compared to the others we've seen. All right, so we just kind of unbag it from when we did part 1 of the video. And it's very important to do all this kind of stuff, guys, especially if you're going to be doing this over multiple days like I am. because you don't want to get anything dirty. The enemy of transmission stuff is going to be dirt. You don't want to get any dirt in here. All right, this way. All right, so here's our 523 ring. Might be able just to get this out with between this tool and our finger. Let's see. Almost. There we go. All right, so there's 523. This will let us take the backing plate out. All right. And then we've got our clutch pack stack, just like that. You notice when these come out, right, the V-grooved pieces stay together, right? And in fact, all of these tabs stay together. All right, so we'll sit that down like that. Now we're going to flip it over. All right, so now we've got to push this spring down just like the other ones, and then we'll pull this ring out here. See if we can, well, he's under too much tension. We'll have to center him over. So let's see if our unit is able to handle this. It might not be. Might have to come up with some other kind of setup for this one. Yeah, this was a little bit too big for our generic tool. So I'm going to do something different here. Give me a chance to figure out how we're going to improvise. All right, guys, all we did is improvise with a couple of C-clamps, a piece of wood on the aluminum. We flipped over our backing plate from the other side. This particular one is not under a lot of pressure, so it doesn't take much to get into it, right? We don't have a tool that'll fit in here, unfortunately. So just trying to find a way to get into it from here without blocking your view. So this the most awkward thing is because we're trying to film, I'm kind of contorted here. All right, guys, we'll just come in here with our pry tools. You got to be a little patient to get it started. Use one to pull it out and one to get wedged underneath between the snap ring, this retaining ring, and the aluminum here. Okay, once we can get one of these pry bars underneath this ring, we'll be home free. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to walk it towards the front here, and we're going to use these ridges to pull it out. Just roll it out like this. All right, there we go. We got that guy out. All right, let's get our improvised contraption out of here, and we'll keep going. All right, we've got our contraption out of the way. That allows us to remove our spring assembly, right, just like the other smaller ones. We're just trying to make sure nothing's bent or warped, everything's still attached. Otherwise, if you don't see any damage, these are completely reusable. All right, so now we can separate these two. And what we've got on here is a seal. So if we look at this guy, this is part 528, by the way, which is the piston. All right, you can see the seal right here. Where's our tool here? So you can see how it has a lip on it, like the smaller ones, right? And it faces in this direction. And so when you go to pull this guy off, keep the tool on the rubber so it doesn't get on the aluminum. All right, so that seals off. All right, and then on the main housing, let's clean some of this old ATF off. There's a seal right inside here. So if I can get you a view of how that lip is, right? So there's that lip right there, right? So it's oriented in this direction. We're going to go ahead and pull this guy off too, though. And that completes the fourth clutch disassembly. So let's move on to the next one. All right, guys, we're up to the Overrun clutch now. So they're going to go over the disassembly of this assembly. So again, the J38734 adapter and the J23327 spring compressor when the time comes, if you have it, I'm going to continue using my generic aftermarket for those purposes. All right, separate the carrier 514 from the clutch housing 504. Now you notice they don't actually show taking these two apart. And when you get the guy unwrapped here, the way we had it after removing it from the trans, you'll see that this guy's held together by a snap ring at the top from this turbine shaft is still held on here. And so since we're going through and just doing the disassembly sections of the manual, we're skipping the assembly sections of the manual, right? So, they went through assembling the fourth clutch. We'll cover this in the next video. But in this disassembly video, we've been skipping around. But for this step, I'm going to have to go back, and we're going to have to land on this forward clutch piston travel check. And what they have you do, each thing in the manual is designed like the dealership was just repairing one assembly, right? And so they went through and they disassembled the forward clutch, and then they assembled the forward clutch, making whatever repair they needed to make. And then after they assembled the forward clutch, it would then be expected for them to do this piston travel check, and so you would have to do some additional disassembly, which is removing this 522 retainer ring from this 502 turbine shaft. And here's our 514 piece right here, which is this guy right here. And so here's 514, here's 502, this whole thing in both hands, and then 522 is this little ring here. So we actually have to take this little ring off before we continue with the next step. We'll pick up the piston travel check during the assembly section. So that's how we continue with this here. So in order to get these two disassembled, we're going to have to do that. Now I can't put this guy, down here, because as soon as we pull this out, this turbine shaft is going to separate. This is the only thing holding it, is this little ring. And the other thing is I'm realizing it's a different type of snap ring. Usually with a pair of snap ring pliers, you would put them in something like this, and you'd give them a squeeze to open them up in that direction. But in this case, I need to get it to go in the opposite direction. So we're just going to improvise with the tool that we have for now. This where he won't move on me. Maybe got this, you guys can see. I'm just going to put the tool in like you would normally use it. And then I'm going to use it to expand instead of closing this guy. Right? Not exactly what it's supposed to do, but it works. All right, now should be able to just get our shaft out. And now we can continue with what we saw in the manual. All right, so we're over here where they talked about separating the assembly, the overdrive carrier assembly from the housing. So that's what we'll do right now. Okay. Looks all right. Just like the others, we got these planetary gears here that we want to inspect for any chips. Want to give them the fingernail test. Okay, and then the next thing they're going to want us to do is remove this backing plate retainer ring. So this is part 511. So that's this picture here. Remove the backing plate retainer ring 511. And then they're going to want us to pull out the clutch pack. It's going to have a backing plate 510, a friction steel stack of 508s and 509s, and then they tell you about inspecting those clutch plates. Given the mileage on these, I'm replacing all of these when we do the rebuild, so I'm not going to bother inspecting anything. And then we'll be in a position to flip it over and grab the spring, compress the spring, and pull out the retaining ring there, which is 507. And this little picture here between the 506 spring and the 505 piston is a blow up down here of the same thing, right? So here's 506, which is the spring assembly, and here's 505, which is the clutch piston, the overrun clutch piston. So let's go ahead and get that guy out. This should be easy enough to get out like this. And then it's nice how this has got like an up on it, so you know what direction this backing plate goes when you're putting it together. So we'll put that guy out first, and then we'll flip it over and let gravity pull out the clutch pack itself. We've also got the sprag in here that the manual did not talk about removing yet, but we're going to go ahead and get that out of the way so that we can get these guys out. It's just a small set of, looks like 3 frictions and 3 steels. All right, let's see what we've got. Obviously, we already looked at that. So what we have next would be our piston here. And we're going to have to get this guy squished down so that we can remove that snap ring right there. All right, so let's bring our spring compressor tool over. This one's a bit recessed, but unlike the 4th clutch, it's going to fit. Right, let's just get it positioned. We're going to get a uniform compression. Just trying to make sure that we've got enough on each end where nothing's going to come off on the tool before we start cranking it down. All right. All right, we're going to, and again, just like the others, you don't want to crank it down too hard, just enough to get a gap under the ring so that you know the ring is removable. Let's see if we can get this guy like this. I know that's probably going to block y'all's view, but all right, let's just come in here with the back end of this tool. Make sure we get it up and over both sides. And we got that guy off. Now we can take the tension off the spring assembly. This tool aside. Let's grab our magnet to help get this out. All right, so there's our spring assembly. And again, just like all the others, we're just looking to see is anything bent, any of these springs not fully attached. And then we've got a piston in here. I think that's the next thing we've got here to do. Let's pop over to our manual a second. Okay. Looks like the wind blew our page. All right, yeah, we're right here. So we're just trying to pull this 505 piston out now that we've got spring out. This is another bonded piston. Don't see any damage on the seal. Basically, the seal and the piston are all one piece on this kind of design. And these are supposed to be reusable. I'm noticing that this particular one, they don't say that. They've said that on the others, that they're reusable, but I don't see them mentioning that the Overrun clutch piston is reusable. But I'm going to presume it is because it's no different than the other bonded ones as far as construction. All right, we've got another check ball down in here at the bottom that we can see. Get some of this out of here. One of the checks that you do on these, I don't think it comes across in the camera, but try to shake it and see if it's moving. If it's not, make sure you check it again after you take it through the parts washer. Sometimes there can be some crud jamming it up. There's the other side of it right there. It's just like a little relief valve. All right, that I believe is it. Let's take a double check here. Yep, they start the assembly section. So we have now completed disassembling this piece. All right, next up is disassembling the turbine shaft. This is pretty simple. There's just a couple of oil seals on both ends, 501 at the front and 503 at the rear. And so that corresponds to these two sets of seals here and here. All right, so let's get those guys out. There's our Teflon seals. We're going to replace these so we don't care about damaging the seals, but we just want to make sure we do not damage where they sit. So we're just going to break them off like that. If you give them a squeeze on the side, they kind of puff out a little bit so you can get a hold of them. You can break them just like I'm doing right there. All right, and then we'll flip this guy around for the camera. Get Give this guy here a little pinch, get a hold of it, give it a pull, get underneath it. That guy off. These shouldn't be that easy to break, by the way. That's how you know that way time to replace. Pinch and pull, go underneath, break. All right, we're done with this now. Okay, next up. All right, guys, and one other thing on this turbine shaft seal is to make sure this check ball right here, which is part number 534 in the diagram, is present. All right, so they show that. You don't remove it, just make sure it's there. You're just supposed to inspect that it's there on the end of the turbine shaft. All right, now we can move on. All right, so again, because we're jumping across the assembly sections, we're going to jump over here to the overdrive carrier assembly, disassemble, and that's where we find this roller clutch assembly that I was referring to as a roller sprag earlier. That's part 512. We've already bagged that guy because we removed him earlier. I'm not sure why they didn't just put this in the previous step, but they didn't, so that's that step all done. And that leaves us with the last piece here, which is to actually continue separating this guy out. So there is a snap ring here. Fortunately, we're not fighting with a spring compressor this time. But we're fighting with a little guy here that can get in the way. So you can see, you gotta get your finger down here to kind of hold these tabs out of the way. So I'm gonna have to do it over on this side as well. Oh well. I knew that was gonna happen because I had to take my hand here to compress these guys so that that ring could pop out. But yes, these rings are capable of flight, and I knew we would get at least one in this video. All right, so we got that guy right there. And now if we go look at the rest of our assembly, so we took off 521, he went airborne. We just removed 520 from 514. Now the rest of this guy, as far as these planetaries here, this can be further disassembled, right? They do talk about breaking all this apart and going through it. I'm not going to do that, though, unless we find that the end plate check is wrong, right? So as you can see here, just twisting it a little bit, you know, this guy lifted up, right? This little guy lifted up. This little shaft. So that's what they're trying to show you, that you can take all this apart, right? You can pull this guy out, and then you can remove this, and then all these little needle bearings are going to roll out, right? They fit down in here, and you can go all through and wash this, right? There's a washer here. There's a retaining thrust here. And each of them are exactly the same. So I'm not going to go take all these apart like I was saying, because what I want to do is I want to go in here and clean all this, and I want to do a clearance check on all of them before I disassemble it, just to see what I've got. But just to show you, it's that simple to take apart. The only thing holding it together with that plate removed are these guys, and so you can pull them out. And if you take notice of what we had on there before, I'm going to put this plate back for a second. You can see this plate. You see how these little notches fit into the tops of those pins, right? So that's what's retaining and holding them down. This plate and that snap ring is the only thing keeping them in. Once they're out, just like I showed you, you can pull these out. All right, that's it. Let's move on to the last component we have, or last subassembly rather, and that is the fluid pump. All right, folks, last component of this disassembly video is the transmission oil pump. So we've got two halves here, 203 and 206. And then there's a bolt here, 220, holding a splash shield 239. And then over here on that 206 piece on that cover, there's going to be a 226 retaining ring, and then we'll be able to remove the pressure regulator boost valve, bushing, the bush valve itself, the spring retainer. 238 would be the inner, and 230 would be the outer spring. 231 would be the regulator valve. 232 would be the bore plug, and 211 would be the bore plug pin. And then we'll have on this bottom view here, this is just another perspective of 211, 212, 213, and 214 on the other side, which would be the regulator valve bore plug, the regulator valve bore plug pin rather than bore plug, and then 213 is going to be the spring, and 214 is going to be the valve. So two kind of sides to this. And if you guys remember from the disassembly video, we still have the bushing or the seal stuck in there. It did not come out. So what we've been looking at here, so there's one of those pins, and there's the other pin, right? So we were just looking at this kind of view here. And so what they're wanting us to do is separate this guy out, and looks like, whoops, we have a little bit more fluid in here. Let me go drain this out before we continue. All right, we got our fluid cleaned up, so we're going to pick up right here with removing these bolts, which was the first step. They're going to be 13 millimeter bolts. Yeah. Some reason my socket doesn't quite fit in here. I have to get a different socket. That's odd. It's just not enough clearance for this particular socket, my impact socket. Let me go grab my regular wrench and see if we can get it out. All right, guys, we're just going to use a regular ratchet. It's really odd that the impact socket didn't fit in there. Just use a dead blow to deal with the fact that there's a lot of torque on this guy. I'm holding the bottom side with my hand. Right, there's a bottom piece down here until we get this all the way off. And then here's the guy that had the little bracket piece. Let me set this down. All right, so we had that manual mention that. If we go back to the manual, we can see that's 239. This is that little splash shield that they were talking about, right? There's a passage here, and the fluid gets splashed up with this guy here. All right. Let's move on. So it talked about removing these assemblies here. I'm going to peel what's left of our original gasket material off. This is the actual guts of your pump right here. I'm going to set that aside until they tell us to do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece. So we were looking at these retaining pins when we stopped the previous segment. But on the other side are snap rings that hold this stuff in. So we can take our snap ring pliers, and we can take this stack of components out. I'm going to block your view on purpose, just so nothing goes flying here. All right, just kind of hold it up a little bit of an angle. I'm going to try not to block your view too much. I'm just going to depress on the stack while I take the tension off with this snap ring. Almost. Yeah, I hate these kind of fasteners. There we go. All right. Now you got to keep your finger here, or this guy definitely will go flying. It seems like the smaller they are, the more prone they are to doing that. All right. And so we can now take out, this is that whole stack we saw before with the reverse boost valve bushing. And this is the boost valve. And then there's a spring retainer. And then there's an inner spring. And then there's There's an outer spring. These guys are all color-coded, right? And you just want to try to keep them in the same order that they're in. I think that's... Nope, we still should have another piece. Push it down from on top here. Basically, we're just trying to work this additional valve piece through the assembly here. All right, so there's the cap, or the plug rather. It goes up against the pin. Now we just got one piece left. He's kind of wedged up here for some reason, I'm not sure why. All right, guys, just kind of trying to push this guy through with our pick. So get gravity on him. All right, now we've gotten everything out of here. There's nothing left in here up this pin. Now we got a super teeny tiny ring on this side. Super tiny. But it's going to be the same deal. These tiny rings are definitely an eye protection deal. Okay, so the shoulder of the pump is in my way, so I'm going to try to turn this so I can get the tool in at a better angle. I don't know how much you guys can see. I don't know how much you guys need to see taking out a snap ring, but it's basically the same as what we did before, just miniaturized. And trying not to block your view, I don't know if I'm going to be able to see what I need to do, so we might just have to skip showing this piece. Let me see if that's enough. Yeah, I need to get in here where I can see, guys, so we're probably not going to be able to get this. I'll bring this back after we get this off. All right, guys, we got this little dude out. Now we can get the rest of the stack that's in here out. Just going to take our pick and kind of work this guy out so that we can get in here and clean. Not sure why he's not moving freely. Should not really be this much force to push this guy out, in my opinion. It's interesting. And let's see, looking for an improvised tool here. I'm going to use the marker. So it moves in okay. Doesn't require much force at all to move in. But she is not wanting to come out. Just kind of getting stuck. Just tells me that this bore might need to be dressed up on the edge, maybe where the snap ring was. All right, we'll take a look at this and we'll come back to it. Let's keep going. We've got a couple of sealing rings over here. I think that's what they're going to have us do next. Let's check. All right, so we're stuck getting this guy out because he doesn't want to come out. So these rings down here are what we're going to take out here. These are all seal rings. So on this 99 model, they're a two-piece design like the other ones we saw earlier. Looking for a suitable tool. Kind of give them a squeeze on the side to separate them. Just grab them with the pick. Unfortunately, my hands are so slippery with this ATF. There we go. There's one. where this one is. Looks like right there. It's not hard, guys. It's just super slippery. All right, and there's that one. And then we've got, looks like a thrust washer here. Yep. They didn't mention that in the manual. Let's see if they're going to talk about it later. Nope, they never even mentioned that. They're already getting into the reassembly. Just going to take a quick gander ahead to see if they mention it anywhere, and no, they do not. All right, so they're getting into assembly and checking this stuff. We're going to go on to the next half here. So we're done with this piece. So for some reason, this thrust washer wasn't indicated. These two sealing rings. We took off the whole reverse boost stack valve in here. We could not get this guy to come out. We'll have to come back to him later. Now we've got this piece here on the body. So 204 and 205. These are the two drive gears. These should just come out. Thought I might need the magnet, but I don't. All right, those just come out. Just a little messy. So 204 and 205 separate from 203. And then they talk about removing the oil pump O-ring seal. And inspection, and then a pump body flatness check. All right, now with everything out, I'm going to go ahead and take that pin out. I don't know if this is the right size or not. Let's try this one. First little punch was a little bit too big. Come on! What the devil is he stuck on? There he goes. All right. I know, he was just stubborn. All right, let's get the other ones. We got this guy right here. This guy, we still got a spring on him. So this guy's still under some spring tension. So when we pull him up, we're just going to aim him down a little bit to get this cap, or rather plug off, and that spring. And we got another one here. This is the one we already took the E-ring off the other side. So he's not going to be under any spring tension, or maybe he shouldn't be anyway, but we'll put this here just in case. Nope. All right. All right, now let's see if we can extract these other pieces. So now I'm going to try to push this through. I guess before I do that, I need to get the rest of this off. There's that one. And we still got to remove this one. Now that we've got everything out of the way, should be able to nudge him out. You just have to keep rotating the pump around, finding different access points. You can lever him out. Okay. I don't think there's anything else in there. All right, now we've got this guy still. There's that pin. There's a plug here that we need to get to let go. It's got a spring behind it, but it just doesn't want to come out all the way. I'm going to put a little bit of lube on that to try and ease this piece out. So we're all done here, guys, except we're trying to get this valve out of here. And he's kind of wedged up in there. We're just going to pop over here and knock one more thing out before I forget. We still have this O-ring seal sitting around the pump. All right, that's a simple one. That's done. So let me figure out how we're going to get this last piece out so we can wrap up this video. All right, guys, we got this part 223 out. It had to be just tapped out with a little force. I guess I was just being a little too gentle with it. There's still another piece. Let's see. Lost my bearings here. There's another little piece right here. It's just, just won't just come out freely for some reason. So we're going to take a screwdriver, any kind of tool that's long enough. Work it out. For some reason, there's just some sharpness on the machined edge here that made it difficult to get these kind of parts out. All right, and that'd be part 225. All right, one other thing we've got to get out now is this guy here. So if we flip back to the manual, this is 215 is another pin. It's a much larger pin, which is retaining spring 216 and TCC control valve 217. And that guy's right here. You can't push this pin through from this side. It kind of rests on a shoulder right there. So we got to push it through from this side. I don't know if you guys are probably not going to be able to see inside here, but there's a little ridge that you can get your punch on. Of course, it's kind of awkward to hold this thing. But you start tapping on that, and you can see that pin starts to come out. I'll try to hold it like this so you can see it come out. All right, so there's that pin. Now with that pin out, you should be able to remove this spring. Right, and then we should be able to remove this valve piece. Oops. Everything's super slippery. And everything seems to want to be jammed up. This one's another one that's kind of got a sharp edge that he doesn't want to come out. This has never been rebuilt, so I guess it's not too surprising. All right, guys, that is everything, right? So we have completely disassembled this. Now, I know because we had some problems getting this 223 part out, it might have been confusing. So let's go review what all we removed here, right? So just kind of recapping, right? So we pulled all of this out from the reverse boost valve bushing forward, and then we removed these TCC regulator valve pieces. And then we removed these TCC control valve pieces. torque control valve pieces. And then we had gotten this piece here stuck, which was the TCC shift valve pieces. Now, another view of all of these is on the parts explosion, right? So here's the reverse valve assembly. This one here would be the shift valve assembly. This one here would be the control valve assembly. And this guy here would be, what was it called here? The regulator valve, right? So that's just another view of all these parts. And we've gone ahead and individually bagged and tagged all of these. So there's our plastic thrust washer that we took off earlier, our 2 oil rings. Here's again our bolt and our splash shield. Here's our 2 drive gears. We removed our O-ring off the front half, which is 203. They're showing the bushing that's in there, but we'll tackle that later. And that's it, guys. So we have gotten everything out. Now, the only thing that we didn't do that we've shown was this one here, which was an all-body flatness check with a straight edge. And all they want you to do here is put a straight edge with a feeler gauge to ensure that it's perfectly flat and straight. Now, I'm going to tackle that when we do the reassembly video because this one's already gotten way too long, and I'm going to clean it up because that can affect the measurements. We got a lot of fluid film on here. They can affect us by 1,000th or so depending on where it's at. So at this point, guys, we're done. We're done with part 2, and we're done with the complete disassembly of this 4L80E. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. I hope you found it useful. Stay tuned, and we'll go through not too long from now on the reassembly video where we'll do a complete remanufacturing of this 4L80E. If you got questions or comments, leave them below. And as always, thanks for watching.